Listeners everywhere, welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan, the weekly fix for your screen addiction and a trusted source for discussion of all things film and television. Please keep in mind that for the purposes of this podcast, Joel and Ryan are not acting as journalists, but rather fellow moving picture enthusiasts. All of their opinions should be taken as such. Also, please be warned that while Joel and Ryan may seem like petulant children, they are, in fact, adults who may occasionally use adult language. While they promise to bleep out all the worst words, it's a good bet you will still understand what they were saying. And now, with no further ado, here's Joel and Ryan.
Welcome, everybody! Welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan, the show where everybody wants to be a Michael or a Sonny, but you know what? You got yourself a couple Fredos. All right, welcome to the Movie Show. I am Joel.
And I'm Ryan.
And we have a super fun show for us, and we hope it will be for you. We are going to be talking about, well, we know he's one of my favorite actors, but he is the pinnacle, the top, the A1 sauce of actors when it comes to Ryan. And so I will let Ryan introduce the main subject of our show today.
Well, we're talking about Boston / New York stage and screen actor John Casale. John only made 5 movies. Of course, the fun bit of trivia about him, if you want to bring him up at a dinner party or something, is that only in 5, he had a brief TV appearance in a Peeping Tom episode of the TV show NYPD back in 1971. And he did a short film, like a festival film, which I can't remember the name of it, 10 years earlier, like in 1962. But he's only in 5 Hollywood films. He has 5 main screen credits, and all 5 films were nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. But what's more significant than that, I think, is that between those 5 pictures, there's 40 Oscar nominations. Not just that they were all nominated for Best Picture, and they're double digit. I believe it's 11 or 12 acting nominations in there. So it's powerhouse stuff loaded with powerhouse people. He himself was never nominated for an Oscar. I guess before we get going too much on him, we'll do a little biography of him. John was born, she had an older sister and a younger brother. He was born in Revere, Massachusetts, to an Irish mother and an Italian-American father. And his father was a traveling coal wholesale salesman and was a rather domineering guy, although he wasn't home much when John and Stephen in particular, their older sister, was a bit older than them, was traveling around, but he had this, interesting upbringing. And I think of it as a very old school upbringing. When that's same with my mom's folks. They were the same kind of thing, and he was a traveling toy salesman, and so he had this magical, car full of toys and stuff that none of my aunts and uncles could play with. There was all off limits. No toys for you, nothing for you. This is all for the other kids and Bismarck and Minot and wherever the hell I'm off to this week, and I always found that funny, that their lives were surrounded with this stuff that it was off limits to them. And his sort of background reminded me of that. He studied, he's like the rest of us actors or people, he got into drama in high school and took to it. He went to study theater arts at Oberlin College first, and then transferred back home to Boston University. And Boston University was the home of a rather renowned acting teacher. I believe his name's Peter Cass. And John Casale and Olympia Dukakis were fellow students under Peter Cass at the same time, in a bunch of the same shows.
Couple slackers.
Yeah, and Peter had this philosophy. Olympia lays it out in this cool documentary that we're going to talk about at the end of the show in our little for further listening and viewing. We don't want to tell you what it is at the top of the show, because then you just can go watch that.
Go watch that.
What do you need us for? But the philosophy was that you whatever, and I believe this too wholeheartedly, and it's probably why John is my favorite, because this speaks to my soul as a performer myself, and as a lover of theater craft and as a lover of film. Peter believed that he first of all, he was one of those weird professors that saw right into you, whatever your vulnerabilities and whatever made you anxious. Like that's what he was interested in discovering. And he found it, even if you tried to hide it from him. But his belief in technique, and they learned a lot as being part of this program, but its core idea was that whatever it is that it makes you vulnerable, whatever it is that, you know what I mean? Whatever it is that weakens you, it's your job the way you make the character real is to share that with us one way or another. And that is in every single one of these performances that we're going to talk about.
Yeah. It's that thing that you try to hide from everybody externally, that thing that scares you the most, that maybe you dislike about yourself the most, not necessarily physically, but what is it, that thing that you have inside you that just you wish you didn't have? And Cass wanted to find that, and he would insist you have to find it and you have to bring it to every character. You have
part
to.
of the curriculum. We're going to talk about it. You just have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And that's great, and it's really great when you have on stage. It's all virtually necessary if you're doing serious work. In film, when the camera is your partner and it can get really close to you and you really can play that layer that Joel just mentioned, it's not just it's not wear your vulnerabilities on your sleeve. There's this very human natured thing to disguise it, to try and hide it, to hold it back, to not share it, and to have it there all the time, and to be playing hiding it or rationalizing it away, or whatever the tools we all use in life to bury our vulnerabilities. That's magic. Whenever I talk about a performance I really love, it usually has that extra layer to it. What is it that we're holding back? Well, watching somebody hold something back is the most interesting thing I think that you can see on screen, even if you don't know what's going on.
I can't remember if it was.
It brings things to life in a very real way that makes the whole experience, whether you're in a superhero movie or whatever you're doing, makes it real. And he was just absolutely a master of that. John believed that it starts with what's the character's pain, what makes them hurt,
That's what I was going to mention.
Is built upon that as a foundation, and it's.
Yeah, I can't remember who shared that, or if that was in that documentary that we'll talk about, or if that was in one of the other interviews that I was watching. But yeah, they were talking about he would always, no matter what it was a comic character, a serious character, what is the pain? What is their pain, and how does that affect everything else that they have? Every other decision that they make.
Everything else, and it's there in every single one of these roles. It's really awesome.
Yeah. And I think it was, and I also love, it was, and Pacino talked about, I think this is in that documentary, but Pacino talked about, he always asked questions. Everyone, he always asked questions, but he didn't necessarily have to have the answers. He asked all these questions about the character and about who these people are, and he didn't always have the answers. And he's like, that's okay. We just need the questions so that in that moment you can.
Yeah, I don't think John articulated it quite that way. It's Al that realized the lesson was you don't have to have the answers. Yeah. I think that for Pacino was a revelation.
I think Streep is the one who says that. She's like, he would annoy the directors and stuff,
because
it would annoy everybody.
They want to give him what
always...
he needs to move on. When the camera's rolling and the money is ticking, asking 20 questions about this situation or this particular line or whatever, is not particularly useful. And so a guy like Sidney Lumet, who's a very theatrical guy, the way he directs films, directed one of these films that's coming up, you know, his instinct is to answer the question. And what Al realized, maybe not on the spot when all the lights were on, but he realized eventually was you don't have to, it's not about getting the right answer. It's it's the idea that asking questions opens the door to endless possibilities. And suddenly there's all these different ways of doing things and all these different ways of playing things and different avenues of storytelling that if you don't ask the questions, you wouldn't have thought. Horowitz, one of his best friends, says, the playwright says, is maddening. Questions after questions. His nickname in the New York theater was 20 questions. That was his nickname.
Yeah.
And because acting with him was playing that parlor game all the time, but being willing to ask those and being willing to find all those different avenues and stuff. Pacino, Meryl Streep, they say they still carry that lesson with them. You know, that's informed their work to this day.
Yeah.
And that into more of the specific like performances and the people he worked with, all the best people, you know.
Yeah. You know, and it's that willingness to be completely vulnerable that, you know, that is what makes him so, like, you that's why you look at him, that's why you watch him, and it's also what makes you forget that he's playing a character. Is he just sort of, you know, I hate when we say, oh, he becomes that character, he's no longer John Cazale.
It's a cliche,
but in his case, it really sort of is you sort of you forget that someone is playing it, and it just looks like, no, that's just that guy.
His appreciation, the appreciation society for him has grown through the years, obviously, along with the legends of those films. But for a guy who's as much a part of the pop culture as he is, he was a forgotten man. His name was sort of forgotten. And a lot of the theory behind that is because people don't remember John. Matter of fact, I'll tell you another funny story before we launch into his movies. He didn't win ultimately. He won 2 Obie Awards in the same year for the revival of Line that he did with Richard Dreyfuss, which, when Fred Roos saw it, ultimately got him the part of Fredo in the original Godfather film. And another, they're both Israel Horowitz plays. The other one was the Indian Wants the Bronx. And he played the Indian in that. I can't remember the name of the guy he plays in Line, but he won. Before they realized that he was the same guy, he had won the Obie for both of those performances. And they had to, somebody pointed out, well, you can't do that. That's John Casale. He's the same guy. The New York film critics who had seen these plays and had decided that he had given the best 2 supporting performances of the year that they saw in New York in 1971 had voted unanimously for him twice, not knowing he was the same actor. That's stunning. I mean, I don't know if I'm explaining it well enough, but the impossibility of that for these critics not to know, for him to have been so memorable in the show, and yet for them to not known that it was John Casale both times, is crazy. And they eventually withdrew the Line nomination, and Pacino for leading character and Casale for supporting, both won for the Indian Wants the Bronx. And that's an amazing story to me. They had to huddle together like right before these announcements were made and pick one, because somebody who knew better finally said, you guys, this is the same guy, right? Is that what you mean to do? Or is it like a tie? How do I, when I go up there, how do I say this or whatever? That's not a legend. That's a funny thing that actually happened, but it's that pseudo anonymousness. It's how he can be so memorable, and yet it's Fredo that we remember, and it's Sal that we remember. You know, you don't get much of a sense of a performance when you watch these people, not in a conventional way. What Joel says, it's real. It's all so real that it's stunning. And all 5 of his performances are like that. They're all just bring home the reality of who these cats are. And a big part of that is embracing their weaknesses and embracing their vulnerabilities and communicating them in a believable way. He was a master at that. They called him the master second fiddle or the master sidekick, but it's what he was really a master of was using a character's weaknesses to make them utterly believable people on screen. That's a stunning achievement for anybody.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking. I sort of feel like this isn't a caveat or anything. It's just a reminder. You know, we're going to be talking about 5 of the greatest movies ever committed to celluloid.
Sure.
But we're going to be talking about them through the lens of John Cazale and his performances and so there's going to be lots about these movies that we're not going to talk about. So I don't want people to like go, oh, this is the episode where they're going to talk about the Godfather. No, we're not. We're going to talk about the character of Fredo as portrayed by John Cazale. So so I sort of feel like I want to make sure that we're not, these aren't going to be deep dives into these movies. We are going to be talking about this one performer and what makes his performance so memorable, so spectacular, so rich.
The good things is all save one of these, although it certainly has a really hot reputation as well, but all save one of them really are part of the like I say, the pop culture. They're very distinct things from their eras that are sort of iconic and very memorable. So hopefully, even if you haven't seen them all, there'll be something. And we'll try and keep the super actorly talk to a minimum, but it's hard not to talk about the craft of acting and storytelling whilst talking about him, because he was a true craftsman. You know, a lot of the guys from this era, Hoffman and some of the big heavy hitters were what you call method actors. And John had a method, but he wasn't a method actor. He was an academic, and he sort of he was a questioner, and he liked discussing things. And
gotta say that's one of the things I liked most about him.
I mean, it was he would do the trick of kind of staying in character, and we'll talk a little bit of that when we get to Dog Day, where again, Sidney being a more theatrical style film director, that film was a very theatrical sort of experience, which we'll talk about. Whereas early on here, he sort of kept his head down and he enjoyed surprising people, you know, and that's the word that came up time and time again when you hear his peers and his friends talk about the experience of being on stage with him or being in a film with him, is how surprised they were, how they couldn't have anticipated what they got based on what was on the page. And even when they knew they cast the right guy, and Ruse said, as soon as he saw him in line, he knew that's the guy. They'd seen every young actor in Hollywood for all the different roles in The Godfather. It was this massive, months-long casting thing. They talk about it in the Robert Evans doc and stuff, and everything that's written or shown about The Godfather. There's a great scene where James Caan is reading the Michael at the wedding scenes, you know, because he was a more famous guy than Pacino. So they wanted the big star to be the hero of the thing. And of course, that was totally the wrong choice. And thank God it worked out the way it did. But
yeah.
He was surprising. He surprised people, and that's neat. Not shocking you or playing tricks on you, but just shocking you out of your comfort zone so that you're always trying to keep up with them and always trying to try different things. Gene Hackman, who just a few weeks ago we were talking about what just a horrendous interviewer or interviewee he is. You know, people say, well, there's a handful of them, Harrison Ford and stuff. There's some like people who, when you're talking to them, are, even if they're trying to help sell the film, they're sort of obstinate naturally. De Niro is definitely another one. To hear Hackman talk about John Casale, because he's still very, like, he's not letting you have much, but it's for him to come, first of all, for him to come out and do that is a big deal. And then the way he does it, and the admiration that he shows is really intense. Yeah. And a lot of that is just the fact that John would surprise him. John would take things to a next level when he least expected that to happen, and that it made everything better. And that's the second biggest theme. The biggest theme certainly is vulnerability and how it shows itself on screen and how that makes something real. That's his greatest trick. The other thing is that always doing something different, always trying something, no matter how inappropriate or ridiculous, always asking those questions and opening those doors, and how that made everybody around him step up their game time and time again in every single one of these films. Even the very top leading men of their and ladies of their era, he made a better actor, and they all say that, and that's pretty remarkable as well.
So let's jump into it. Let's jump into his first film right out of the gate. First time he's ever been on camera, and that's again. And I don't want to harp on this, but there is a huge difference between stage acting and film acting, and the fact that he went back and forth so seamlessly and was able to use his methodology of acting to and apply it, so that his very first film is The Godfather. Heard of it? And so he's going up against some, you're not going against, but like he's on camera with some of the best at the time.
He's sharing the screen with James Caan and Marlon Brando and Al Pacino and Robert Duvall, Diane Keaton. Very first time we see Fredo in The Godfather, it's this brilliant thing. Diane Keaton, who's great, she sells this because she plays along with him. He stumbles drunk up to their table at her wedding, and she's, you can tell she has no idea what he's gonna do. He gives her like a kiss, and then
he comes in really close and like
really uncomfortably close, and then he gives her just this little peck on the cheek, which had to have been a relief because who knows what he was going to do. None of us have ever seen this guy before. Michael Pacino's line is, "This is my brother. This is my older brother Fredo," and he does this thing which is not in the script where he introduces Michael to Kay at the table. He's like, "Yeah, this is my brother Mike," and then he looks at her, and then he seems to like be catching up to what's happening, and he goes, "Oh, so this is your friend, right?" And it's the way this relationship, first of all, the Pacino Casale relationship is, just,
it's one of those magical things.
Yeah. They're partners, and they're in almost every scene together in these first three films. And so, or the third and fourth film, but either way, that relationship is really, really important. And it starts here where you see Michael's amused by this. He knows Fredo's harmless. He's amused that his girlfriend is freaking out. What's going on? And, Diane Keaton doesn't freak out. She giggles. That's, if you watch her in any of her movies, when she gets uncomfortable, she starts giggling and cackling. That's how she reacts to stuff. And it's a beautiful piece of real magic moment. A lot of people say that there's so much happening at this wedding that this little introduction really doesn't seem like it's much, and it isn't, but it is. The way Michael humors him, the way he treats him like it's affectionate, but he's kind of like, this is my clown brother Fredo, and he kind of condescends to him whilst humoring him at the same time.
It establishes that hierarchy without having to, it sets up what's coming in terms of the family dynamic and the family ranking without a single word.
And tiny thing. We've spent already 10 times longer talking about it than it actually what actually happens on screen. That's for you, Bill. You can have, sometimes the explanation is 10 times longer than the thing itself, because sometimes a really great actor just having fun with what is a fun moment packs in so much meaning into the thing. And that comes from the third sort of more unsung characteristic of John, which is that it's not method acting. It gets it. He wants to understand the whole project, and he wants to get fundamentally what his little part of it is, and then maximize every second he can with meaning with that, And this is a classic moment like that, where you just, you get it.
Yeah. He understands the larger story that needs to be told, and is using his time on camera to maximize that storytelling, and his part in it. It's not, look at me and the cool thing that I'm coming up with and my character. It is, I need to serve this story, and here's how I can do it in this tiny 45-second scene. And
Pacino and John, although they weren't fast friends back in these days, but it helped that they knew each other. They were both messengers for Standard Oil in New York while they were struggling actors. And of course, by this point, they'd also been in the Horowitz play, which was renowned in its moment. So they knew each other pretty good, but they had always known each other before either of them had a lick of success. They were aware of each other, and then they were kind of friendly acquaintances with each other, and then they were scene partners together. And it just, that brotherhood lives on the screen in this little moment. And it's important because honestly, you go through a lot of movie before you see Fredo and Michael in a scene together again. And by that point, they're both been radically transformed. But the best, the big moment, the coming out moment for Fredo and for John Casale, probably in general, because it really is unexpected. We do get a sense of who he is, but this big event occurs in his life, and this is, and it strips everything away. We're left with the absolute core of what this guy is in this moment. Paulie, you won't see him no more, is called in sick. He's basically Don Corleone's body man and bodyguard. And we find out later there's some duplicity to him, but that's a fun story too for who was going to be Paulie and how that was all going to go down, but we'll have to save that.
That'll be in the Godfather deep dive.
That'll be in the Godfather saga deep dive, which will be, I figure that'll be the April, May, June, and July episodes of some year where we actually break down every single second of the Godfather.
And relish it with glee and going, yay!
I mean, right? If we can do, how many shows did we do for V? 5?
6 month and a half. 6 shows on V. Yep.
So so that's why the Godfather, we'll just keep that in our back pocket. If we ever need 3 months of shows, we'll just have that all set up.
That's true.
Paulie didn't come to work today, so Fredo is, Vito's like looking around. Brando is this great. He's got all those great moments in the Godfather, and Fredo's like, Paulie, I don't mind getting in the car, Pop. It's okay, Paulie's a nice kid, and he's just sweet and nice.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, what happens is, and it's huge spoiler alert.
Well, if you haven't seen The Godfather at this point, sorry, you go watch it, and then you'll appreciate John Cazale better. So, but pause our
there's
show.
An assassination attempt, very famous. The appearance of the oranges. Oranges always spell doom for our characters when they appear in the Godfather films. Fredo's the driver. He's armed. He's supposed to be protecting his dad in his own neighborhood, out in front of his own business. He really is safe here. Mm-hmm. But because of some stuff that's happened in the plot, there's an assassination attempt on him, and they shoot him 6 times.
Yeah.
And Fredo comes running around the corner, and he does this thing with it. He like can't,
trying to grab his gun and a fly's
he can't even hang on to it. He's not prepared for this moment. He's not a bodyguard. He's not even a gangster. I don't know what he is. But what he's reduced to with his dad lying on the sidewalk is this terrified little boy. It's hard to explain, but it's miraculous when it happens. Richard Dreyfuss says, this isn't correct. This is Dreyfuss perhaps waxing metaphorical, but it's still an interesting thing that he says. It's worth repeating. He says, we don't see his eye. He's in the movies and all the scenes. He's in the background of all this stuff, but you don't really see his eyes until this moment. And then when you do see him, you never stop seeing them again, whether it's in this movie or all the other movies. Casale's puppy dog eyes that have all this pain and fear and shame and guilt in them, like all that's in his eyes at all times. And he just sits there. He's got the gun like under one finger and it's dangling from his finger. And you just got, Brando is laying there lifelessly. He's not moving and he doesn't know what to do. He's not touching him. He's not going for help. All he does is plop down on the sidewalk,
on the curb,
like a frightened little child, and cries. And the scene, right before the scene cuts away, he says, Papa, like he wants him desperately to come back to life and for this not to have happened. And it just takes your breath away. This is the scene where Marlon Brando, the Godfather in the movie that's named after him, gets shot. And it's absolutely 100% Fredo's scene. And there's no question about that. By the time it's over, it's like, how did he become the star of this moment? Because it's so real and so amazing. And even though the violence is really super well choreographed, and that's that great shot like above the car when you see the choreography and the bodies moving around, but it's Fredo's childlike reaction to it, and as good as his introduction is at the wedding, which I think is quite brilliant, this is the moment. This is the moment where you're like, this dude is it. You're not even thinking it at the time. You have to think about it later, when it's time to write the review or to look back on what you experienced or to examine the legend of the Godfather. Because in the moment, you just see this raw thing that's real and true. And it's just what John is. It's not what you expect at all. And yet that specificity in performance, it makes it so real and so true. And it just knocks me out.
Right.
It just knocks me out. I can't believe it when I see it. Every time I see it, I can't look away. We talk about, I don't do this anymore because I don't know anyone who does, other than Michael. I don't know anyone who does this anymore, but Michael's always like, it's one of those things, although he has 9,000 of these things. So I don't know how he ever gets anything else done. It's one of those where if I come across it on TV, I have to sit and watch the whole thing. Well, that's not really true of anything for me, or never was. But The Godfather is one thing where, like, even if it's kind of on in the background, when this moment comes, and it's not because it's a shootout or it's exciting, because Brando plays it great too. Brando knows it's going down just based on the sound of a couple footsteps. Like, you get how this guy's lasted this long. There's not enough to save him, but he acts like right away. Yeah. But Fredo's poor little kid crying for his papa in the street with a pistol in his hand. And I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to get a whole bunch. We're going to get some more of that in the sequel Godfather 2. It's a lot more of that. Yeah, it is tremendous. Let's move. So after the Godfather, let's move on.
Well, I don't think you can. I think you have to skip to the Vegas super douche scene. I don't think you can.
Oh my God. Why? Oh my God. Yeah, of course. Yes.
You're also supposed to ask me 2 questions at the end of each movie.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Don't forget to do that.
Yes. Okay. I didn't know how you wanted to bring that up.
First off, that when Don Vito, 5 shots and he's still alive. That's spoiler alert for Godfather. Now you're finding out that he was shot, assassinated, and lived through it somehow. When they're bringing him home, they're sort of running down the whole story with him, and through the protection of Don, whoever out in Las Vegas, we're going to send Fredo out there. And again, this is one line. I'm going to learn the casino business. And the way his eyes are darting around to see if that's a meeting with everyone's approval. Like, it's his only line in this whole major sequence of events. It sets up this future scene, but I don't understand, Joel. And this is my wonder, and it's why I'm so in awe of him. How can he do so much in one little line and have it not be like absurdly overdone and overripe? I don't know how. That's the magic. That's the thing every actor wants. They want every second on screen and on stage to be memorable and meaningful, and yet you can't cross the line where, I don't know what anchors him to reality so that we accept that sort of huge thing from him. That's the magic, and it's the magic formula. And if I could do it, I'd have Oscars over here on my shelf, because I strive for that all the time. But that it's one line. I'm going to learn the casino business. It's perfection.
Yeah. And
then later, when a lot has happened,
right.
Much later in The Godfather, he is out in Vegas, and this whole scene is, I don't know how to explain it. It's everything. Again, it's everything. Michael and Duvall's character, Tom, show up in Vegas to make this Vegas deal. They're going to buy their partner in this one casino they share in Vegas out. Mo Green, played great by Alex Rocco. And Fredo's been his mentor, if you will, or his, I'm not sure what the relationship is. You get the idea that it's been a little weird. But he's got this whole thing set up. He's got this polka band,
hookers,
full of hookers. Yeah, exactly. Or showgirls or whatever. But it's this party. Fredo's opens up the door, and then he comes walking in the room, and yeah, what is he doing? He's dancing kind of, but what he's really doing is like conducting the band somehow. It's crazy. Watch it. It's the greatest thing you'll ever see.
And it's that turn when he turns, he's like, Michael?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's that.
It was all this guy's idea. Like he's not, what is he? He's still, what's great about it is he's still the same guy, even though he's this completely different guy than we saw earlier in the movie.
Yeah.
He's just a total dork and kind of an asshole. And you're like, where's Fredo? But Fredo's there. This whole thing, he's trying to impress his brother. He's trying to be the big brother, which is something he never gets to be with Michael. Their big brother, Sonny, spoiler alert for The Godfather, is gone. And this is it. These are the brothers that are left, or the three people in the scene. And Michael, again, tries to soften it, but he's like, I don't, get rid of them, get rid of the band, get rid of the girls. I'm only here for a day. I'm tired from the flight. Like, he just, Pacino just beats it all down.
Yeah. And it's not mean. It's like, this is not good right now. Yeah.
You're my brother and I love you. He says that to him several times throughout this series. You're my brother and I love you. And there's always a but coming after that. Just the way he says it. Pacino's pretty great in The Godfather too, as you might be aware. But it's the disappointment that he has. And then the way he sort of kicks into this, I don't know what's wrong with him. Like, his trying to save face so desperately is so pathetic. And this whole scene plays like that, and it's up and down for him.
Yeah. And then it gets to the point where even like, because he's so not in control, he lashes out and he's like, get out of here. He's like, starts screaming at the people to leave. And it's, and then kind of comes, he's all over the place. Rocco
comes into the scene and they pitch this deal, and there's this big conflict, and apparently Fredo's been taking advantage of the waitresses, and the character Mo Green's been slapping him around a little bit. It's this mortifying thing from Fredo's perspective. This is really a Michael moment, but he's like, you slap my brother around in public? What's this I hear about that? And you could tell these guys are gangsters. They're titans. And Fredo's, hey, no, it's just a misunderstanding. Like, he's trying to, at every turn, he's trying to like take Mo's side. And, he's the great line after Mo leaves the room after all his threats and stuff. And he says, Michael, you do not come to Las Vegas and speak to a man like Mo Green like that. and he's not even on screen for half that line, and yet the line is, it's amazing. Mm-hmm. And that's where the signature moment comes. Fredo, you're my brother and I love you, but don't ever take sides against the family again. And watch, we've already seen, I mean, it's already been a mountain of humiliation and pain and failure, this whole scene for Fredo. Watch him in that moment. Mm-hmm. And it breaks your heart.
Yeah.
He's screwing cocktail waitresses 2 at a time. He's been a total asshole. He's lining up these hookers to get, he's got this stupid band. He's just acting like a despicable person. And at the end of all of it, he breaks your heart.
Yeah. You still find that sympathy, that empathy. Okay, so then what would you say is his signature moment then in The Godfather?
Well, I saved it. I skipped over it cleverly so that, because I'm not sure what my answer is going to be to that, to all of these. I hope I get inspired. But for this, the signature moment is when it's right before we fade to Sicily and Michael's adventures in hiding in Sicily after some stuff he's done. The last thing we see is Fredo coming into Vito's bedroom at home in this one of those big hospital beds. He's still got the IV and everything, and he just comes and goes over to the chair, and with his hands like between his knees, he sits in this chair and just sits by his father. Just sits. Yeah. It's wordless. It says everything about him that you could possibly need to know. It's glorious. And what was the other question? What is a moment, or where does he bring out the best in another actor? Well, it's in that Vegas scene. Because you're already seeing this to some degree, but you really, through Fredo, and this is true of the whole series, you see Michael's dark side come out. You see that even though he's his brother and he loves him and he does, his intolerance with him grows and grows and grows throughout these films. And this is where it really starts, because Michael's our hero of the story at this point, and we're really wanting him to succeed. But it's weird. It's weird how incredible, it's weird how much of a foil he is for him in that moment, while still being really, really true to this character. Yeah. It's huge and broad and clownish, and yet it's very real and vulnerable and amazing. Yeah. So, and you see Michael's reaction to it. You see Rocco's reaction to it. Duvall's, they're all on edge. And Fredo, now that he's speaking up and trying to be this new awesome gangster guy, just ramps up the tension every time he opens his mouth in that scene. And it works like a charm. It's a brilliant scene. Yep. All right. So our next film is another Francis Ford Coppola film. It is is this the first film that is making its third appearance on the movie show with Joel and Ryan? Maybe. But it is The Conversation, and we talked about it a few weeks ago with Gene Hackman. It obviously had. We talked about it in the 70s conspiracy thrillers, episode, which was number 2. I want to say, maybe it was number 1. I can't remember. Go back and listen. It's back there someplace. The official rankings, if that matters to you. And this will be a little easier, because even though he's as big a part of the conversation as he is a part of The Godfather, but in both films he's not really in either of them very much. He plays this recordist surveillance expert. He plays Gene Hackman, the main character of the thing is a guy who records this conversation of these two. I think we get the idea even when we first hear the conversation that they're two lovers and they're sneaking around. And through these brilliant techniques, they sort of record that. And John Casale, he's second billed in the film, but he's barely in it. He plays Gene Hackman's second fiddle at his little surveillance company. One of his tech guys. Yeah, who's one of the guys running one of the remote mics that's recording this conversation. And he's actually later in the film, it's in a brilliant scene and a purely expositional scene. He explains how they did it, and that's a really, really fun. It's a really fun scene for old school audio files to listen to, how we see it, and then he explains it halfway through the movie, and it's very, very cool. But the best bits of it are when they're putting this, they've recorded this from how many angles, and they got all these tapes, and they've got to sync them all up together. And when they do that, it turns into one big long thing where you can listen to the whole conversation. And while they're doing that, I don't know what Stanley, the assistant, he played two guys named Stanley. He played Fredo twice. I don't know what that's kind of interesting. And Sal, if you want to round it all out, there's a Sal in there too. We'll definitely talk about him. Stanley, the assistant, he's just making small talk, and it's Hackman and him. And I don't know that he's being particularly annoying, but because I don't really think he is. I think he's just talking. He's just like, well, I wonder what they're talking about. I wonder what, this is the dumbest conversation I've ever heard. And he's got all this stuff. And Hackman's like, look, would you just be quiet? And
it's just workplace combo. That's all it is. This is just two guys at work going through, and it just so happens that they're going through all of this stuff, going through these tapes, and there's
right. And this is John's big scene, really, but it's really all about Hackman's character. And this is, I think I can pretty much pre-answer the, where does he bring out the best in another actor? I mean, Hackman was reticent to go too far with this scene. He wanted, it's early in the movie, he wants to keep this guy grounded somewhat, and but Coppola clearly wanted more. And Casale, very famously, at least so the legend says, understood that bit of direction and felt it would be easier for him to deliver on that than it was for Hackman. So he keeps poking him, and even though he's not doing anything, he just keeps poking him. Oh, as you say, Jesus, what about it? He's like, hey, don't say that. And then in the very next line, for Christ's sakes. It's hard to explain, but
it's so good. Yeah. And Hackman again, Hackman, in terms of, not wanting to take it too far, but needing to give a little more, his reaction to that it's just like, just don't. No, it really bothers me.
Hackman doesn't fall into the trap of going too far with it. He becomes more vulnerable. He becomes more open. And this is a guy that the character in the conversation, this is something he does not want to be in any way, fighting against sharing anything with anybody about anything. He's just the most private guy in the history of movies, truly. And John gets it out of him. And then when he finally bites his nose off a little bit, again, we get that great, you just see that sense. It's not deep-seated pain and disappointment this time, but it's this failure, it's this defeat.
Yeah.
Where he just it's always going to be like this. You can see the sort of realization of that. It pays off brilliantly in this scene where they go to this surveillance convention. Just fantastic sort of, it's not super plot related, but it's the centerpiece of the whole thing is this convention followed by this party back at their office afterwards. And at the convention, it's I can't remember the actor's name.
Talking about the guy who
his competitor, he's really important in it. Alan Garfield.
Yeah, Alan Garfield.
Alan Garfield plays this guy who's a competitor, and his team has the maroon blazers, and they all have these uniforms, and he's got all these little gizmos and things that he's trying to patent and sell. And of course, Hackman's like, yeah, I build all my own equipment. Like, he's just not having it. Well, can I get your picture with our thing? And he's kind of weasels away and squirms. He doesn't want his picture taken. But there's this great moment where Garfield, they're interacting, and Garfield's great in it too, because he sort of kisses Hackman's ass, but he also pokes at him in some really rather harsh ways. And that there's not a relationship there, so it's not as meaningful to us, but there's a ton of plot and a ton of history that's revealed in that. Casale, he says, Stanley, come over here and watch the booth. I want to talk with a guy here. And Casale comes around the corner wearing the blazer. He's gone to the other team. He's skipped to the other side. And Hackman's reaction to it is what is really important. He's gobsmacked by this sight. But Casale's kind of, and they cut to him twice, which is a weird thing to do. I don't know why Coppola does that, just because he wanted it both ways probably. But they cut to his looking at him, and the first time it's kind of like, yeah, I'm doing this. That's right. What are you going to do about it? And the second time it's your fault.
Yeah.
I don't want to be wearing the blazer and being bossed around by this asshole, but it's like, it's both. It's all of it. It's very, very cool. And Hackman comes up to him and he's like, hey man, I think I'm being followed by this guy. You can't leave me now. That's revelatory to see this character saying all this stuff. It just comes blurting out of him. And he's like, we both know you're never, he's like, I'll show you how some of the stuff works. It's like, we both know you're never going to show me how this stuff works. Come on, you're just lying to me. But when he shows that he's scared, when Hackman, and this is his tragic flaw, when he actually opens up a piece of himself to Stanley wakes up and he's like, oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, if you're going to stand here and beg me, sure. I won't go. I won't, it's a really neat connection. There isn't anyone else in the movie who Hackman's character is going to open up about his fears that are going on, but this one guy. And he's in this party scene, but he's really only in the very background of the party scene. He's not really part of the movie's finale at all. But there is this great moment. Like I said, he explains all the stuff, and then they playing these tapes and they're talking about all this stuff. And Alan Garfield's character says, for Christ's sakes, man, you gotta blah, 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 blah. And it gets really quiet and awkward. And John, like with perfect comic timing, and yet in a moment that doesn't get a laugh because he always plays stuff slightly beyond the laugh. We'll get to a really brilliant one later, but he says, he doesn't like it when you say Christ's sakes.
Yep. It's so good.
I love it.
It's so good. What do you is that his signature moment in that film?
That's his whole performance in the movie. His signature moment is those two looks. It's weird that there's two of them, but it's when he passes in the,
that's what I was going to choose too. Yeah.
It's amazing how much is happening there between two great actors that, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So much meaning. So, and the scene obviously where it makes the guy better is really every time. And it's only Hackman that he really interacts with. His being a sympathetic witness at that party when they're pranking our hero and really kind of coming after him is really powerful because he's the one guy in the room who's on his side clearly. And that's powerful because he didn't say anything and didn't really do anything. He's not in a position to do anything. But those other two scenes, particularly that first one where he just gets...
Yeah.
It's written that way. It's a really smart script, the conversation. So it's written in a way where this is the guy that draws our hero out. Of all the people, you got Terry Garr as his fling, and you got Garfield coming after him hard. You got Harrison Ford stalking him.
Yep.
Harrison Ford plays Mr. Smithers in the conversation. If you haven't seen the conversation, you really have to see it. You need to see it to believe it. It's amazing. But it's Casale's character, and it's that relationship that there's not a lot of trust there, but there's just enough trust there, just this much more than there is with anybody else, that gives us a window into who these people are. Otherwise, I don't know that we would have it exactly. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah. So
and
good.
Coppola says it. He says, this guy on the page isn't much. And we knew that. And I knew that if I put John in it, he would make him a full-blown character without me really having to do any work as a writer. And it's kind of because it was written in a hurry, and that is exactly what happens. He's exactly right.
Yep. So then we get the sequel. After the conversation, we get the sequel to one of the greatest films, and arguably you get an even greater film.
A lot of people do argue that, for sure. Yep. And these are all tied together. The conversation happened because The Godfather was such a big hit, and to part of the conditions of doing a sequel to the big massive hit Godfather was that Paramount would give him this little budget to do this much smaller film in between. Mm-hmm. And once he had wrapped on that, because they technically both came out in the same year, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Because Godfather 2 was a big deal and a big production, as you can imagine. And Fredo, unlike The Godfather, is front and center in The Godfather 2. It's to the point that I can't sit here, or it'll take me a couple hours. I can't do what I've been doing with these, where I talk about every moment like I would like to.
Yeah, no, yeah. Godfather 2
is too much. He's really
more Fredo. Yeah, there's a lot of Fredo.
Right.
We get great Fredo.
Yes. Like The Godfather, Godfather 2 starts out with a big ceremony. Now they're out on Lake Tahoe, and Anthony, Michael's firstborn son, is having his first communion.
Yeah.
And it's an excuse for one of these big gatherings, just like the other movie started with Connie's wedding reception. And it's a great scene, goes on and on and on, takes up the first 40 minutes of the movie practically. And Fredo's got this sort of trophy wife who's getting drunk and causing all kinds of problems and embarrassing him. And she's like dancing and drunk and slipping, and he tries to get rid of her. It's so sad. I just don't know how to explain it. Poor Fredo. He tries to get rid of her, and she's like, "Oh, I know you." She's like, "I'm just dancing." He's like, "No, it's not just dancing's one thing. You're falling all over the floor." That's what he says. She's like, "Oh, I know why you're upset, because he's a real man," or whatever. And she's saying this like in front of everybody. This is ultimate humiliation. And you see Michael whisper to Rocco, one of his guys, one of his security guys, I guess we'll call him. And Rocco comes over, and this is so touching. He's like, Michael says, "If you can't deal with this, I have to."
Yeah.
And what is Fredo saying? "I think you better."
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just defeat and mortification and shame and embarrassment. And they just pile it on this guy. And so Rocco does this thing where if you can't see me, he does this thing where he's like, he touches his cheek like, "I got it. I'll handle it. Don't worry, buddy. I get it." And he just drags her off into the crowd, kicking and screaming. And Fredo comes, sits back down at the table. He's like, I'm sorry. I can't control her. And Michael says again, what does he say? He says, "Fredo, you're my brother,
and I love you."
He doesn't say "I love you," but
you're my brother.
He says, "You never have to apologize to me," is what he says. What cold, bitter, ironic words those become later. There's an assassination attempt that takes place on Michael and his family's life later that evening. There's this labyrinthian, plot. It's all plotting. With Michael, it's all plotting. With Vito, it's something else. But with Michael, it's all figuring it out and being one step ahead, and keeping your friends close and your enemies closer, and all that. That line is from this particular film. And he's sort of a pin to the old world, the way things used to be. We see Connie, and she's sort of destroyed, and she's this cynical, self-destructive person. And Tom is like kind of resentful and at odds and being shut out from the crime part of the crime family. And the marriage is sinking, and all this bad stuff is happening in the modern part of Godfather 2. And the guy that really connects us back in a key way with the old days, the guy who's sort of unchanged a little bit, is Fredo. And it's this big deal that has to do with Cuba on the eve of the Cuban Revolution. It's a really great movie. There's a ton of stuff in it. It's fantastic. And I'm not even talking about the other half of the movie, which is De Niro and his first Oscar-winning performance playing young Vito coming up in turn of the century New York. And the way those things contrast and compare with each other. It's very, very powerful. But there's a scene in Cuba that's my favorite Fredo scene, I think, in the movie. It's hard to say. It's so many good ones. But he's brought this, what is it, $2 million in a suitcase. There's a great scene where the bellboy tries to take his bag from him, and he gets in a tug. He can't. It's just this big ball of tension. He's been carrying $2 million around in a briefcase for like a day, and you can tell he's just freaked that somebody's going to come take it. It's a beautiful bit of physical comedy, which John's really, really good at. But it's later they go to have a drink together out in this little courtyard or whatever. And I don't want to replay the whole scene for you, but there's little bits that are tough about him that are so important. It's hard to explain. I love this scene more than any other, I think. So I don't know. I'm a little intimidated by having how to explain what happens, because Fredo goes through several permutations of himself in here. He gets almost confessional. He tells the story about your mama always said, or no, what's he say? He says, sometimes I wish I'd have married a nice girl like you did, like Kay. And for once in my life, do something more like, be a little more like Pop. Mm-hmm. And Pacino got this great line where he lets that sink in for a second. And then he says, it's not easy being his son, Fredo, and this is a real connection between these guys. Cause we've already heard Michael in the movie, Fredo, he's got a good heart, but he's weak and he's stupid. And he said this to Tom basically behind his brother's back. And it's not wrong. That's why it hurts to hear it. Mm-hmm. And Fredo says, yeah, Mom used to tease me. She said, you're not one of mine. You were left at our doorstep. By gypsies.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's like, he takes his hand, this whole thing, it's all so tactile. And I love this scene so much. He's like, you're not a gypsy, Fredo. And he leans into him. And I'm amazed by, he leans in, he goes, Michael, I was mad at you. And then he leans back, and I think he has a lighter in his hand. And he goes, he squeezes it, and he doesn't throw it. He squeezes it really hard and lets go of it. And it plops down onto the table. And so he doesn't.
Yeah, you're right.
And he says, why didn't we talk like this before? And I every time the scene's on, and certainly the first time I saw it, I'm like leaning forward going, yeah, do it. Tell him what's going on. This is it. If you don't tell him now, it's over. We know what's going to happen. You know what I mean? And I just tell him, I'm desperate for him to spit out the words. I had a pretty crucial moment like this in my own life where somebody was trying to tell me something and I wanted them to tell me, and they did what Fredo did in this moment, where it was just the embarrassment of the moment, the whatever it is, draws you back into yourself and makes you go hide somewhere. And that's what you see all that in the scene. And Michael knows something's going on, but he didn't get it. And he really does think so little of Fredo that he doesn't ever imagine until he figures it out in one of the worst told lies in the history of cinema. Of course it would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be.
That Fredo's wrapped up in this assassination attempt and this plot against him. And it very innocently, but nevertheless, he's wrapped up in it. He gives this innocent lie. Oh, I don't know, who's here. I don't know. Yeah. And then, it's not later that evening. He's talking about this guy like he's been hanging out with him for years in front of his brother. And his brother gets it all in that moment. It's an innocent lie, but it's like, why would you lie about that? And now I know. And Pacino's reaction to it is amazing. Fredo's incompetence at being stealthy or being a gangster is right there in the forefront. Later that night, he gets the kiss of death. And I'm going to let you play this one because I think it's important, because I was kind of amazed when you played it before we did the show. But he grabs, these are the two lines that I think represent John Casale, and at least in nerddom. Pacino grabs him by the shoulder.
The ball has just dropped on the new year. And it's
in Cuba. If you know anything about the new year of 1953 or whatever it is in Cuba, it's literally the night that Castro took over. So this history is playing out where our characters don't know what's happening, but if we know our history, and
it's just a big and a big celebration.
Big celebration going on. Yeah. Streamers, confetti, lights flashing, and he grabs on him and he pulls him to him and he kisses him right on the mouth. And he says, "I know it was you, Fredo.
It was you, Fredo. You broke my heart. You broke my heart."
That's stunning to me. When I hear that, that's not what the scene is. that's so quiet and reserved, and there's so much meaning and feeling in his words and the way he's saying them. But you have to watch it, and you have to see that he's holding on to him and not letting him move. And Fredo is like flailing like a fish on a hook, and it's incredibly powerful. And Fredo's fear, all the things that we see in John Casale's eyes in this moment, the fear is just intense and unbelievable.
Yep. And
he runs away, and they go their separate ways. They both escape Cuba in different ways.
Well, and it's come on, get in the car. Come on, get in the car, Fredo. Come on.
I know they tricked you. You're still my brother. Get in the car. There's no way
out of here. There's no way off the island. Yeah, and Fredo takes off the other way. Yeah, so good.
Fredo, I just think play that again one more time. Do you have it queued up?
I know it was you, Fredo. You broke my heart. You broke my heart.
Wow, Al! Holy smokes!
It's delivered in such a way that, in the craziness of a big party, it's like, theoretically, there's no way he's even if you're so close to each other, you can't talk that low when you're in a club with the music playing and the band but no, it's what he's saying is cutting through everything.
Well, but it's more than that. What he's doing physically and what he's saying, when I listen to it, absent the visual, it's completely disconnected from that, and there's meaning in it that I didn't know was there until I heard it on its own. Like, to me, that's kind of incredible. That's what's stunning about that to me. We're resisting the urge to just play you clips of John Casale performances because I feel like we sort of lose the essence of what the show is if we do that. But that one's worth hearing because there's a moment where, and it's a culmination. It's not just a moment where Casale is such a brilliant actor that Pacino is brilliant, but that the heartbreak, you broke my heart, is profound. Well, and that's due to the connection between the two men and reality, plus the two characters. Like, it's all coming home in this big moment.
Well, and you hit it on the head when you said he's like a fish on a hook. Because his performances he absolutely cannot get away, and yet he's just sort of trying. He's that awkwardness that we have, that we know of Fredo, and he's when he is let go, and it's still kind of that flopping, flailing, and his eyes stay locked on Fredo's eyes stay locked on Michael. The entire time as he's kind of stumbling, as you said, but he's floundering. He knows he's cooked. And it's so good. So yet it's not comical. It's not overwrought. It's not showy. It's absolutely real and authentic. And it's so
magic.
Good.
It really is movie acting magic.
Yep.
Fredo flails about in the background of the rest of the movie until Mama Corleone dies. Spoiler alert for Godfather 2. And then he's allowed to come to the funeral, obviously, but Michael doesn't want to be in the same room. But then Michael's basically giving him the kiss off. He's like, I don't want to see you at any of the clubs. I don't want to hear you. When you come to visit our mother, I don't want you. And he goes up to his right-hand man, Alan Neary, really brilliantly played by Richard Bright throughout the series. And speaking of undersung actors, and he says, when you're watching it for the first time, you don't get the meaning. Maybe you guys will because of the way we've set this up. But he says, I don't want him touched while my mother's alive. And what that is an order. It's an order to kill him after his mother dies. Yeah. And we don't quite get that. What we sound like it's like he's protecting him to some degree, even though he's exiling him. But if you watch Bright, Neary's reaction to that is profound because everybody loves Fredo. Everybody loves Fredo, even now. Yeah. At her funeral, is it at her funeral? No, it's beforehand. This is the kiss off scene. It's there's this scene, I don't know how to explain it. It's Gordon Willis's best lit scene, the Prince of Darkness, they call him, the cinematographer. It's a scene where it's Tahoe, you're in this boathouse on the water, and it's snowing outside in the background, and these ceiling to floor windows, and Michael is walking with his usual sort of confidence and chain smoking like he is, and slugging water, because even though he doesn't know he's diabetic, he is. That's all set up in this movie, and it's not even mentioned. It's kind of amazing. And Fredo, there's this weird lounge chair that's probably meant to be out on the deck or something, and it's in the middle of the room, and he's sitting in this chair. And of course, to hear Coppola talk about it, he's like, the chair was there, and we knew kind of what it was, but we couldn't have anticipated was his using the posture that he had in this chair while he was flopped back and draped over the thing in defeat and humiliation. And also when he was fighting against, there's both. It's moments when he's fighting against and trying to make his point and trying to stand up for himself and advocate for himself at least a little bit, where he can't take a position of strength while being in this chair. He literally can't do it. And Coppola said what we didn't know was how he took that and made it the whole point of the thing. Like right there. It's amazing. It's really incredible choices. It's that brilliant, I'm smart, not like everybody says. I'm not dumb, I'm smart. And it's like he's trying to convince himself. It's pathetic.
Yeah, it is.
I was
pathetic,
passed over. He doesn't get to do this in any of these movies. This is an unusual thing where he's spilling his guts, and where we want him to, and we're accepting of it, because it doesn't happen very often in these movies. These movies, they keep it all pretty close to the chest, and he's just spilling it all out, all his frustrations and he's trying to stand up for himself and explain why, he didn't know anyone was going to try and kill anybody, but why he wanted something for himself after all this time. And all Michael can do is like, haven't I always taken care of you? It's just, it's just cold and brutal. And I don't want to be taken care of. You're my kid brother. It's an incredible dramatic scene.
It's my favorite scene in all of the movies, I think.
It's so good. Well,
it might be.
I feel like it's a little too obvious for me it's so good, but I feel like it's a little too obvious. This is the scene where this is the big Oscar speech moment. Like I feel like what he did so great it was this, certainly, when he had the chance to do it, but it was these other things, where these quieter moments where he was really special. Yeah. But I don't know. It's on the list. Well, it's on the list of all-time great John Casale, since all-time great Godfather scenes even. Yeah, because it's like, to me, it's because everything that it's been leading up to this moment, and it's the desperation. Yeah. It is the like you said, it's the he's not trying to, he's outwardly trying to convince Michael, but he's not. He's convincing himself. He's going all the way back to the beginning of the show when we were talking about Cass, the film there, the teacher, his professor. It is that he is desperately trying to hide that thing that makes him that is the source of his shame and pain, and this is Fredo doing and that. Everything, the lighting, his own soul, the chair, they're all betraying the snow falling in the background on the water. They're all just betraying him and revealing the truth of it. It really is powerful. And even though there's no resolution to the scene, it's cathartic to hear a character spill their guts like that. It's tremendously moving. So it's certainly on the list. He during his mother's funeral, and this is I'll just skip ahead a little bit, but this is the moment where I think we talked about all this stuff with Pacino. You broke my heart. I mean, in this film, his inspiring, incredible performance from other people it's in every scene that he's in. Mm-hmm. But there's a moment, he's not even in the scene, where Connie Talia-Shire comes to Michael and gets on her knees in front of him and just begs him to take Fredo back. And her making the case, but more her description of him to Michael that it appears to melt his heart somewhat, at least somewhat, to where at least he's willing to humor Fredo's presence in and amongst the family. And they bring him back. They bring him in home. It works. He walks out. Again, another wordless, stunning film. The last time we saw these two characters hugging together was the horrible kiss of death moment. He comes up to him, and Fredo first looks up at him, can't believe Michael's standing there in his presence. He said he never would again. And then he realized he's got a cigarette in his hand. He's got to put the cigarette out of respect, but it's all awkward and goofy and weird. And Michael just opens his arms, and Fredo falls into his arms, and everything, the tension, everything just drops out of him. But it's in this scene, like all scenes, it's his eyes. Watch John's eyes. It's amazing. And then you see it. It seems like a non sequitur from here to the end of the movie. It turns out not to be, but it's the crazy uncle has come home. He's not working in the whorehouses anymore. He's not running a club in Reno. He's just hanging out with the family. He's spending time with his nephew. They're going fishing together. There's this beautiful monologue about when my father took me fishing as a kid, and I was the only one who caught a fish. And the secret was that every time I put the line in the water, I said a Hail Mary. And every time I said a Hail Mary, I caught a fish. And we'll go out fishing together, and we'll use the secret, and you'll see it works. And it's just adorable. It's these two children, and the child relating to the adult child.
Yeah. Because
even in this relationship, Anthony, to some degree, is like the more mature person.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't ruin. There's no reason to ruin the end of Godfather 2, but it because you don't have to, because isn't a performance aspect involved in it, but it's everything. It's everything. Fredo is Michael's soul, and Michael's tolerance and love and acceptance of him is the last bit of his soul that he has. And when he forgoes that, or when he loses that, he loses everything. He asks his mom early in the movie, can a man lose his family? She's like, how can a man lose his family? She says to him incredulously. We all know, you're losing your family. He loses everything. And it's because of him. It's not even because of him being a gangster. It's because his paranoia, his inability to trust, and his inability to forgive has turned him into a monster. And Fredo, Kay, the kids, everybody, they're all kind of at the heart of that to one degree, but Fredo most of all. And it's Godfather 2.
Yeah.
This is just a third of it that we kind of talked about, and we kind of rushed through it. It's amazing. And Casale, it's just his graduation as a film actor through these movies, from the first one to this, and the importance of the character and the trust in the writers and the filmmakers because the old part of the movie was written already. It was part of the original novel. This part's the new part, and they knew when they were writing it that they had a guy who could nail all this, and he everything he did was beyond their wildest expectations. Yeah. And talk to anyone who was in it with him, or anyone who worked with him really on anything, but particularly this, and all you get is insane reverence and love and respect for his work. So
yeah. And he wasn't a dick on the set. He was, he
caused some delays and
but sure.
But
it's not because he was throwing tantrums or anything.
Right, or because he was being a diva. It's because as Meryl says, he took his time with things.
Yeah.
That's how he was in life. Mm-hmm. He took his time, and sometimes time is money, and that can be frustrating to other artists, but you couldn't argue with the results. You really couldn't.
Did you call a signature moment?
Well, I think Talia Shire is him bringing out the best in somebody. That moment. I mean, it's all of it, like I say. But that I'm going to call out that moment because he's not even in that scene. But her desperation to see this thing healed in some way, especially where we see her at the start of the movie, like just all these these arcs, and we don't experience them in a clean, dramatic way. We jump through time episodically, and these people transform because of these different events. And we feel that in that moment. So that's my favorite moment. And Talia Shire, just shout out to her. It's heartbreaking. He's so sweet, she says. He's so helpless without you.
That's the big thing. Yeah, it's he really, I mean, he really is.
Can't you find it in your heart to forgive Fredo? It's and we're all, yeah, please do that. We're all on her team, Yep. Even if you can't forget, even if you're not on Michael's team anymore, and it's reasonable if you're not, but you still just please do that. And then when you think he does, it's like with him, it's such a relief. A signature moment's him dropping the lighter on the table. Just an amazing actor choice.
Yeah.
It's just it's like all his films, it's a weird thing that he does that you don't see anybody else do in any other sort of context. It's super organic and real, and it's that. Yeah. I love that. That's everything. That's the whole thing. It's actually a really good point, because I remember it as he kind of chucks it down, but you're right. He does it. It's the same energy as throwing it down. Right. It's the same, it's in the same area, but it's a different choice. It's not a, I'm throwing this away. You're right. It's a, don't let it go and release it. And it's so good. All right. So, I mean, it's really it's the scene you talked about. It's the scene in the deck chair in the boathouse. I mean, that's the scene. If you can only watch one John Casale scene, you pick that one, but I feel like that is that's showmanship, and it's an incredible, emotionally raw scene, and that's what we like. We want our drama to be that, but that's earned by all these tiny little things along the way, and those are the things that he was truly special at. Most good actors, Hackman, De Niro, Pacino, all the ones we're talking about, when it's time to go and let you have it, they all pretty much nail it, because I don't want to say that's the easy part. You have to earn it, but it's if you're a good actor, you nail that thing. You nail the big moment. To find so much punctuation and so much meaning in the little moments is what John was so good at. So that's all. That's the only distinction I'm making there. That's obviously, that might be the signature scene of his career. I'm smart, just desperate. I'm smart and leaning forward, trying to make his point, and he can't physically sit up straight, and he just and his whole body's fighting to do that, and it can't. Yeah. And that's him in a nutshell. So, I mean, it really is brilliant.
So good. Let's talk about his fourth film, Dog Day Afternoon, based on a true story.
Sidney Lumet, when he was cast in Dog Day Afternoon, Pacino tells his story. It's strange because Sidney's done a lot of interviews about John as well, but it's Pacino that tells the story, because I don't think Sidney wants to say, I don't want John Casale for this movie. I don't think he just, now that he's gone, I don't think he wants to hear his words say that. So Pacino's like, yeah, Sidney, what Sidney wanted was a 19-year-old kid. And Pacino, he goes further than that. He goes, and you know what? I think he's right. I think that's right. That's what the character needs to be. But me and the producer, we kept saying, what about John? What about John? And LeMay, out of respect for Pacino, is and because he appreciated John's work, okay, look, I'll read him, but I'm not going to. And Sidney says, and he comes into the room and he couldn't look more wrong for the thing. And then when he read for the thing, it just blew everybody's minds. Yeah. And even though it wasn't the right idea and it wasn't the thing, although, again, Casale, maybe in a slightly more theatrical way than what we've seen in these other movies, or than we're used to seeing in movies at all, he gets there. He gets that 19-year-old, hardwired, tense, kid-like quality to this guy, even though that's not what he is necessarily. It is what he is. It is the purpose that he ends up serving on screen. Dog Day Afternoon, so they cast him, obviously, and the rest is history.
And again, he and Pacino have that chemistry that you cannot
Well, but
you can't write that. You can't plan,
right. Pacino, Pacino just wanted John in the movie because John was going to make the movie better. Like he knew enough to have the vision to want that. And if you hear Pacino tell it, he's like, John's my acting partner. I learned more about acting from John than anyone else. I thought at the time that he was going to be my partner forever, that we're going to just keep doing this stuff together always. And it's really kind of amazing. Pacino, he kind of starts to cry, and he kind of stops, like movie stars do in these interviews. Like, they're happy to let you see them cry, but they don't want to get that crying look on their face. Like, that's not dignified. Pacino's, he's whatever he is, he's a great actor, but he's a star, and he's not going to go there. But he stops and he just waits for a long time, and he's like, it's not in the documentary, which is too bad. I'm not sure why they cut it out. It's in the raw footage of his interview, which I've seen, and he says it's still there.
Yeah.
That's what he says. After 30 years, it's still there. And then he kind of gets back into talking about the movies. But he knew that John would make it special, and he does. I mean, he does. As over the top and crazy and Attica, as big a circus as Dog Day Afternoon is, which it is. It's the story of this guy who's robbing a bank to pay for his lover's sex change operation, and it's the dumbest bank robbery of all time, and it all goes to hell, as you would expect. And but the key thing is that Pacino's harmless in it. He is, and all the bank tellers know he is, and everybody the cop kind of knows he is, and they're all just trying to get this out. But there's something to John too, that where even though he's not harmless, he's dangerous. And the signature role in this, Pacino even says so. He goes, I'm the bark, he's the bite. And they cut to him, and he's standing there with this automatic machine gun. And John, throughout the whole film, is just this tense, the way he uses his body, the way his weird page boy hair flops around and gets stuck to his forehead and stuff. And the eyes have it with this guy. These eyes, the eyes of Fredo, that are so wet and warm and cuddly, and you just want to hug him and forgive him. The eyes of Sal in Dog Day Afternoon are intense and terrifying. Even when he's trying to be nice, he's scary. It's incredible. There's a scene, it's probably the most famous scene of John's from Dog Day Afternoon, where it's the moment before that I think is really powerful, but the scene plays out in a pretty great way. It's important for us to get to know this guy. And, Pacino says to the cop, he says, you better do what I want, or I'm going to start throwing bodies out the door. And they cut to John, and the look on his face when he hears that is like it's serious. Like I don't know what I'm doing. Clown show. Don't look at me. But watch
no, it is absolutely, it is.
It's serious. And then in a moment later, he's like, did you really mean what you said? Did you really mean what you said about that? Well, he goes, what did I say? Al Pacino does nothing but monologue the entire movie, so he doesn't even know what he's talking about. He's just talking tough and trying to make an impression on this cop. He has no intention of shooting anyone or throwing bodies at the door. Yeah. None whatsoever. And John's like, that thing about throwing bodies outside, do you mean that? Because I don't know, I think I'm ready to do it.
Yeah.
And it's again, I'm not doing justice to it, but you believe him. It's scary. So he's scary for the rest of the movie. Yeah. There's this horrible moment where the Fed says, hey, you've done a good job. He says, saying this to Pacino's character, you've done a good job, man. You keeping everybody alive. A lot of people wouldn't be able to do that. This is intense. And what's the guy up to? And he goes, so don't worry. You just, you get him out there, keep it together for a couple more hours, and don't worry about Sal. We'll take care of him. And again, same thing. It's just a reaction shot, but it's this. What do you mean by that? What do they mean by that? What do they mean? And it's human. He kind of knows what they mean, but he doesn't want to face it. He doesn't want to confront it, and he doesn't end up dealing with it. But the FBI guys know right away. Hey, Sal.
Yeah.
Sal's the problem. Sal's the thing that has to be neutralized. And once he's out of the picture, all the rest of this just
they can get all of the
show.
they'll be able to get everybody else. Yeah.
And then this is, the signature moment in it is that, we're going to get a limousine or they end up getting a bus. They're going to take a bus to the airport. It's just ridiculous. Who has ever escaped from a hostage situation on a jet? They're entertaining this fantasy is absurd. But, he says to him, he goes, so where do you want to go? You can go anywhere you want, anywhere you want. And
any country, anywhere. Is there a particular country? Any particular country you want to go?
Wyoming is what he says. And this is apparently everybody involved says, sometimes I don't believe these, but everybody involved says this, nobody knew he was going to say Wyoming. There's one cut where he said Wyoming, and that's the thing that ended up in the movie. And then they even thought it was so great that while they were shooting, they added a line later that was a callback to it so that it really would feel like a thing that they planned, but it was not planned. LeMay said he almost ruined the cut by laughing out loud. And he said Pacino says something similar, but you can see Pacino, he knows better. He's in the movie with John and he knows what John is. And he knows that whatever John does, I got to keep working. And it's a perfect response to why, he's like, that's not a country. You know what? I'll take care of it. And he was able to move on. It's not a country. And then they both kind of look at each other and don't worry about it. I'll figure it out.
I got it. I figured it out. It's so good.
It's great. It's a moment that comes from a deep relationship between two trusting actors. And because Wyoming's funny, but we'll get into that at the end. Wyoming's probably the signature moment of the show, and I'll explain why in a moment. But he's fantastic in that. He's this big ball of nerves. That weird, ironic scene where he gets all pissed at one of the bank tellers for smoking cigarettes because they're not because he died of lung cancer. He was a notorious chain smoker. But Sal gets super judgy and self-righteous with this woman, and she's been in this absurd hostage situation with him for long enough that she's not even scared of him anymore. And it's this weird, creepy exchange. It's really fantastic. There's a great moment where Al says something to the hostages when he's locking them in the bank vault. And then John cocks the gun and goes, ugh! And he's threatens them, and they all scream. And then he jumps back like he's scared of them screaming. It's weird, but watch for it because his choice that he makes really unexpected. There's this weird moment where he's like, watch the bank manager. And he's just this big, tall backed wheelie chair, and he grabs onto the chair and wheels it over all awkwardly next to the other tall backed chair that's at the bank teller's desk, and he sits down in it with the gun and then invites him to sit down. It's so weird and odd and just physically strange, and like I said, the specificity of it is what makes it all memorable. What's he even thinking? He has this whole weird plan with the chair, and it's just crazy. That movie, what did Sam Rockwell said? They keep cutting to John even when he's not talking because he doesn't have a lot of lines in it. As I said, all Pacino does is blah, 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 the whole film. We're bringing out the highlights of some of the things that Sal says, but it's just a handful of things throughout the film. But they keep cutting to him, and Rockwell says in the doc that we'll talk about in a minute, he says they keep cutting him to him because you can see the stakes of the thing in his eyes. And it's really easy to lose track of that when you just watch Pacino because he's fairly harmless. And what's at stake, what's really going on here, the potential disaster and nightmare this thing could become is always in Sal's eyes. And that's why there's so many cuts to him. And I'll tell another funny anecdote. Why not? It's like for you Marvel fans, it's the mid-credit scene in the documentary with Steve Buscemi. John's one of Steve's heroes, and you can see it in Steve's acting. And he says, especially his later period acting, Steve says, he goes, I did it when I was starting out and starting to get some recognition for the Tarantino films and other things, he goes, I did a guest voiceover on The Simpsons where I was playing a bank robber. And when me and my friends were sitting down to watch it, you know how they do The Simpsons, you do the voices in October, and then come May, you get to see the episode because the animation is really good. It's not South Park. They work on it for months until it's finally finished. And he said, and I looked at myself talking, and I had the hair, and I was Sal from Dog Day Afternoon. And he said, weirdly, and I'm like, that was such a compliment to me. And it was the first time I really felt like I've made it. My voice is John Casale's like image. And that was it's funny to hear him tell it. That was his moment where he's like, all right, I did it. I'm an actor now.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny. And Steve knows it's a funny anecdote, but there's meaning behind what he's saying. He really was honored and amazed and believed in himself more from seeing his voice come out of John's face.
Yeah.
In a Simpsons episode. And it's very, very cool. And it comes from this rather iconic, bizarre look. Buscemi says, he goes, when he first appears, I'd never seen a guy like that in a movie before. Who is he? He's one of a kind. It's incredible. Just before he even opens his mouth and utters anything. So Dog Day, pretty amazing.
Yep. So then, do we want to talk a little bit about what happens in between Dog Day Afternoon and The Deer Hunter?
Well, a little bit, and we'll save the rest. We'll save the crux of it to the end, but yeah, we'll save the crux of it to the end. One thing amazing that happened in between the two was he sort of discovered the love of his life. And this is a wonderful story where he was working on Measure for Measure, I want to say, Shakespeare in the Park. Joel said he was a stage actor in the true sense, in that that's what he was always doing. And as these film roles would come along, he would take them and knock them out of the park. But he always, assuming it was just he was going to go back to the stage, that was the thing he was going to do. And he was always welcome back to the stage. Well, he was co-starring in Shakespeare in the Park with this up-and-coming actress, and he came over to Al's place after one of their rehearsals, and he said, I've just seen the greatest actress who ever lived. And to hear Al tell it, he's like, wow.
Yeah, okay. You're in love. And
he goes, yeah, exactly. You're excited about this person or whatever, but I expect that you haven't seen the greatest actress who ever lived. Of course it's subjective, of course, but he had met Meryl Streep, and that relationship, it's hard, but it's very private. And through the years, it's been very quiet. And through the years, not many people have wanted to do interviews about John Casale. So all this is sort of lied dormant until this doc came out, until people really started talking about it, until the legend of it really grew. And a lot of it's just legend. We're going to read some of the more unbelievable aspects of it here before the show is done, just so you can hear and feel the story. But I think we're going to do it in the spirit of drama, and just with the understanding that this may be dramatic versions that represent the reality of their lives. This relationship was really intense. It wasn't just that John loved Meryl Streep or had a crush on her. She loved him too. Everyone could feel how super into each other these guys were. Like they found each other is the words they use. And I don't know if you know that feeling, but it's profound. And I kind of know what they're talking about to some degree, perhaps not quite on this level that they're describing, but that's a big thing that happened to him between films. And the other big thing that happened was he was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. Terminal, they used when they gave him the news. And Al was driving him to his therapy and his treatments that he was getting as a result of it. And Israel Horowitz, I think, is the one who said, he's an actor. So he portrayed a lot of hopefulness that I'm not sure that any of us had when we got, because he was coughing up blood and he was just in really, really bad shape. They were about to shoot The Deer Hunter. It's a big, expensive Universal picture about Vietnam and the effects of Vietnam and trauma, more specifically of trauma on people, and how these different people dealt with it. And Roy Scheider, who was going to star in it, had just dropped out of it because he kind of Roy couldn't deal with it as a metaphor, which I think to take The Deer Hunter, you really have to. The Vietnam prison scenes, and then the later like underground scenes, they are hard to buy. And Scheider couldn't make his peace with it. He was that kind of actor where to do the role, he needed to be able to do that, and he couldn't. So he dropped out of a big production that he thought otherwise was going to be really good, and it is. It's the best picture of 1977.
It is 1978.
8 Oscars.
Yeah.
But that's 77 year in movies, yeah?
No, it was released in
Christmas of 78.
Christmas 78, yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So anyway, without getting into the whole story of The Deer Hunter, which is its own show, but Robert De Niro took Roy Scheider's place and wanted to bring along Casale. And Meryl Streep was in a relationship with him, was going to be in it. George Zunza's in it, one of Joel's favorite actors. He's great in it.
I love
John Savage is never better than he is in this. They brought John along, even though he was really, really sick. And Meryl says that, the studio didn't want him because it's not that they didn't want him as an actor. It's that they didn't want, it was Thorn EMI Studios, which is a British studio that produced this very American movie. Movie literally ends with them singing God Bless America at the end. It's a little, I like The Deer Hunter, but of all the films on this list, a little heavy handed for my taste. It's just a little much. But they really wanted Casale involved. This wasn't a very big role. He didn't have to be in any of the Vietnam scenes, which he could not have done. He plays this guy who is one of those core friends, but he's the one that doesn't go off to war. And his utility in the movie is, also named Stanley, he's the one who's not affected by this stuff. And the contrast of our characters and the way they've changed, particularly Robert De Niro's Michael, compared to him who stayed home and stayed the same, is profound. And that's the use he's put to. Casale doesn't even really talk much in the early goings of the film. The film starts out like the Godfather movies, the big ceremony. It starts out with this big Steel Town, Pennsylvania wedding reception. And every scene that John's in, he's making some incredible wordless choice whilst not stealing from the meaning of what we're seeing. And you can just call out every single one of them. There's this weird one where the bride and groom walk by, and he kind of he does this thing where he pretends to step on her dress, but doesn't, and thinks it's funny, and then looks around to see if anyone saw him pretend to do it, and nobody did. It's this whole bit he plays in just these couple of sections. There's this moment where he's dancing and stuff, and then he kind of looks at this woman, and it's all this business, but then he kind of checks to see if, he thinks he's hot stuff, and then he checks to see if his zippers.
Yeah, there's a whole big group photo. There's a whole big group photo, and everyone's getting ready and all this stuff, and he's looking at it, and then he just quick makes sure he does a fly check.
Stanley's a jerk. He's not a cool guy. He's a jerk. There's the scene early on where he's in his tux and he's sort of with his date, and he catches his own reflection in a car window out in the parking lot. And he just kind of straightens his tie and looks at himself, and he whispers at the end of it, he goes, "Beautiful." Yeah. And we're not used to seeing him be like this, but there's a self-hatred to him that's nevertheless really a part of the character. He's acting out in these weird ways out of a certain amount of shame that he's not going to the war, shame that he's a coward, maybe. I'm not sure what it is. Shame that he just doesn't treat people very well and is human enough to still feel a little bad about it later. The big scene with him, and it's not a scene at all. It's this simple thing where movie's called The Deer Hunter, and at the night of this wedding reception, they travel all night to go out into the wilderness. They literally travel from central Pennsylvania to Washington State mountains. I don't know how they did that, but they did. It's very scenic. So whatever, I'll look the other way. But they get there, and all the history of these characters is all in this scene without it even being spoken. But he's wearing his tux, and he's got this stupid fur hat on, and he's still wearing his tux out in these mountains. When De Niro's all kitted out, he's got his vest and his rifle with the eagle and with the American flag all on, and the little shoulder strap of it, and so Stanley's like, I forgot my boots. Mike, borrow me your spares.
Yep.
Because Mike's a character who brings spare boots to a hunting trip, and Stanley's a character who wears a tux and a Russian hat to a camping trip. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do it. And he's like, what? Come on, don't be an asshole, of course. And it's the argument of the spare boots. Yeah. And Michael's thing is, you got to learn at some point. You do this every time. Yeah, he holds up the bullet and he goes, "This is this." It's the kind of iconic De Niro moment. That really doesn't have much to do with the movie, but this is this. This isn't something else. This is this. And Casale's complete mockery of that meaningful thing. He's holding a bullet in his hand and saying, this is this. This is what the movie's going to be about in just a few moments. We're not ready for it, but it foreshadows everything that's coming. So this is this. This is this.
Yeah. What do you mean? This is this. Yeah, oh God, it's so
It's really amazing. And John is losing himself. He's this hollowed out version of himself.
Yeah, he really is. Yeah.
He's really dying right in front of our eyes, which is a harrowing thing to watch. When Michael comes back from Vietnam, and I mean, I'm skipping the whole middle act of the movie, the body of the movie, but Casale's not featured in any of that. When he comes back and Casale's messing around with his pistol that he brought with him on the next hunting trip they go on together as a group, and everything has changed, and he's stayed the same. And the confrontation in that scene is amazing. And it's what's really cool about Stanley and the Deer Hunter is that the lesson of the boots goes right over his head and off back home, and he just doesn't get it. The lesson of the loaded pistol, he gets to some degree. It doesn't change him, but he's a more reserved and respectable character for the rest of the film. And that's, it's really intense and really crazy, and it's an amazing performance. But it really is true that from a Casale perspective, the story of the Deer Hunter is really the things that went on behind the scenes. It was De Niro putting up the money to insure him so that he could be in the film. It's Meryl taking a role in a film that she was Oscar nominated for the Deer Hunter. It's too bad that she doesn't look fondly on it. She says, well, that's just a girl. It's like a man's idea of what a girl is. And she said that role didn't interest me at the time. I think she's selling that performance short. I think there are a lot of women like that who come up, whether it's in these small towns or that generation or this one or the next one, being very much a man's idea of a girl, and that's a real experience, and that you can bring a lot of humanity to that. And I think she does that, actually. So I think with another actor, you lose all that. So I think she's kind of amazing in it, but she just did it. She took a role that she didn't admire to be with him more, and to be with him at the end, even though everyone will tell you that John did the performance of a guy who was going to beat lung cancer that had already spread to his toes practically. And she played the true believer that believed somehow it would happen. And she did really right up until the last few seconds. There was a post that we put on the page ages ago, because I read it. It's a lot of the things we've already talked to, but I'm going to read the myth of John Casale on his deathbed. I got it here. Give me a second. just so you can hear it. Like I say, I think a bit of this is legend. Even the journalist says, if you believe this, there's a version of the story that says he's like hedging his bets a little bit. But in early March 1978, Casale entered Memorial Sloan Kettering. That's a kind of sanitarium hospital. And Streep never left his side. On March 12th, 1978, at 3 a.m., Casale's doctor told Streep he's gone. And Merrill wasn't ready to hear that, much less believe it. What happened next, by some accounts, is the culmination of all the tenacious hope Merrill had kept alive for the past 10 months. She pounded on his chest, sobbing, and for a brief, alarming moment, John opened his eyes and said, "It's all right, Merrill. It's all right." And then he passed on and disappeared. That story, okay, true or not?
Right. Probably not.
Well, right. That's. I mean, if I really believed it. What did I say in the post? You want to hear my words? I chose them carefully, like I do in my writing. It's not all just verbal diarrhea with me. When I write, I'm a little careful. It's not like the podcast. Sorry. I said, we've been unabashed on the show about our love for John Casale. Admiration and awe for Meryl Streep pretty much goes without saying. I've heard the story below many times. If true, it always feels like a violation somehow to share it. If false, it would seem to diminish the real connection between these two remarkable people. Nevertheless, we pride ourselves somewhat on telling the story behind the story at the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. And there are a few more affecting stories than this one. And I can say that's true. That is true. That sort of knocks my socks off when I read it and when I think about it. When you'll see Meryl, if you watch I Knew It Was You, Rediscovering John Casale, the HBO documentary that was made just about his performances and his memories. When you watch her, she's not in it very much, but she's just not, historically, she's not talk about him very much. And she doesn't talk much about their relationship. The others have to do that for her. But when she's talking about him, she's got this kind of like shawl on and this V-neck thing. And she keeps doing this, like pushing on her heart. And you can see even in the scenes where she's not doing that, like her it's all red and her handprint is there. And through this whole interview, she's gone on and married and she's got grown kids who are like awesome actors. And I mean, life goes on. But when she talks about John, she's really only able to talk about him as an actor, which there's a tragedy and a very real, like emotional heft to it because of that. And the fact, and this is something Meryl, when you see her do interviews, she does this a lot. It's not just for him, but it struck me when I watched it this morning before the show so that some of these things would be fresh in my mind. And it struck me that I saw her own handprint on her heart when she talks about him. Like it was a profound relationship. The relationship with her and Pacino, the relationship between Israel Horowitz and John Casale, he affected these people just in their lives in incredible, meaningful ways. And I cannot recommend enough that you watch that doc.
It's
only 45 minutes.
It's only 45 minutes. Yeah.
It's only 5 movies. It's less than half the length of our stupid show where I just blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
but I recommend you watch it. I Knew It Was You, Rediscovering John Casale. I had it's a little different, but we talked about acting and acting for Joel's a professional actor and he's the real deal. I'm not a very good professional. I wasn't a very good professional. I wasn't good at the professional part. I think I'm a pretty decent actor, but I wasn't good at it was hard for me to get geared up to do repeats and do all that. And that's really what being an actor is. It's giving it your all. It's taking each audience member seriously. I feel like I knew that and did it, but I didn't like it. And so that passionate part of the performance part of it, I didn't really like. But when I dropped out of being a theater professional and became more of a theater hobbyist, I got to do a bunch of shows with my friend Gus, who was my acting partner in my life. And I he was a tricky guy because he was a larger than life, huge character, and we were all just moons in his orbit. You know what I mean? So he is a big superstar. But I found that the trick, and John sort of taught me this from watching him, I found that the trick that acting with a Titan, even on our little intimate, little local level, was the trick to rising above that was not to compete with that. You really can't with some people. Sometimes acting is a competition, a fun one. It depends. You know, we talked about with that realization, wow, this person's really good. When I was a kid, I was in a show with this girl named Tara. She was super great and she was really good. And I was like, oh my God, like it was my first realization that it's not my charm and my up here winging it like I've done. And this is when I was 13 or something, 12, but I still had that realization. She's good. She's like really good at this. And I have to be equally good at it. With Gus, couldn't be competitive though. I had to do other things to hold my own, you know, I had to do something different to hold my own. I don't know if that story doesn't have anything to do with it. I don't know why that popped into my head.
Well, I mean, no, it is. I mean,
you're following the connection a little bit, Joel, right? Because you know me.
Yeah. I mean, and I know, and I certainly know Gus. You know, I was lucky enough to perform with him a couple times myself, and he was a monster on stage. If you didn't up your game with him, he would swallow you.
Right.
And he had no, and I don't mean this in a mean way. He had no compunction about it at all. It was like, you better, or I'm going to destroy you. And that's not going to serve the show.
And I never even heard him say such a thing. I think it was instinctual as much as anything.
He would never say that. He would never say that. He didn't set out
to make you look bad. He just
In fact, the opposite.
He just couldn't be stopped and wouldn't be stopped out of courtesy toward you. So you had to find your way, and
you had to bring it, and you had to bring it every night.
And I guess I do know what made me think of it. I mean, to hear. I had the same feeling. When I quit being a theater professional and stage managing and sound designing and assistant directing and all the stuff I was doing for money, for a career. And I started just acting again and writing again and doing the things that I liked. I took for granted that just like I think Al did, that I was always going to have my partner, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't mind that it was a hobby, and I liked that I only had to do 2 weeks of shows instead of 2 months. You know what I mean? Like this was great. I rediscovered my love of it. So that's a person that we lost. That I don't know. Yeah. When you think about the great losses and you see John's effect on these people, it brought some of those feelings up. But hey, we got a question.
Yeah, let's see. We have
I have a question. Who gave you the right to play God?
What the hell's going on out here?
Why do I bother?
What is the point in doing anything?
How dare you? What more do you want from me?
I have a question.
Yeah, we got our good friend Rob, you know, he knew we were doing this show and was nice enough to send us a couple thoughts.
Thanks, Rob.
As you may have noticed,
friend of the show.
Yeah, as you may have noticed, this was not a countdown of John Cazale films. We did not rank anything because, as we said, we're like, no, these are all number ones. These are all top.
There was going to be a point, although after the deathbed story, obviously my joke wasn't going to really work tonally like I had hoped. But there was going to be a point where we revealed the top 5 are all tied for number 1.
Number 1, yeah.
We didn't get to that, unfortunately, but that's okay. It was a dumb joke anyway. But
however,
I love them all.
They're 5 tremendous films. They're really good.
And in their own ways, they're just incredible performances.
Mm-hmm. But Rob is putting us to the fire here a little bit.
Down, right?
Yeah, he's going to pin us down. He's like, what do we think his best performance is, Cazale, and what is the best film he is in? So they might not be the same. They most likely probably won't be the same.
By
answer.
Just a nudge. I mean, I think they are the same film. I think they're both Godfather 2.
Yeah.
I think his best film that he's in actually is probably the original Godfather, and he is brilliant in it. I think his best performance by just a nose over Dog Day Afternoon is Godfather 2. Just because there's so much more meat on the bone for him in that particular film.
Yeah.
And that's why you get more of him, you get more diverse performance, you get a more fully realized character, you get a character who's tied to the stakes of the story in extremely key ways. Yep. And you create the ghost of a thing that haunts all sort of future things in its wake. And it's a perfect summation of kind of what he was as an actor too. So if I had to pick just one performance, it'd be Godfather 2. I'm someone who slightly prefers the original Godfather to Godfather 2, but again, only slightly, and that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
So
I would have to agree. I mean, I would say his
Dog Day Afternoon is extraordinary.
Yeah, it's a really oh boy, I mean, it's an incredible performance. I just think but Fredo is iconic.
Fredo is him rising to the challenge of an incredible dramatic responsibility with absolute flying colors. Dog Day Afternoon is creating something that's not even there, all on his own, out of nothing, out of thin air, and that is a stunning thing to watch as well. And he was good at both, but I think if I had to pick one, it's Godfather 2.
Yep. All right. So this is Rob's endeavor into speculative fiction. What do you think he would have been great in if he had lived? So basically, if he hadn't died in 1978, what roles in, say, the next decade? So let's just put it in some of the movies of the 80s. What do you think he would have? What might he have been in? What might he have been great in?
I almost can't do this, because it's a great question, and it would be fun to speculate. But from a legacy standpoint, and I don't want this to sound weird, but we've talked about I've talked about all the babysitting money spent on seeing Titanic over and over and over again because Leo DiCaprio drowns at the end of Titanic, and what he leaves behind is perfection.
Yeah,
and that wouldn't be possible if he'd have kept going. He never did Meet the Parents, and he never did Devil's Advocate, and he never did whatever crappy movie Meryl Streep's been in. She's been in a handful. She Devil.
Yeah. I was gonna say Death Becomes Her, John Cazale in the Bruce Willis role.
But do we really want to see that?
I don't know. Maybe
there's a way that the 80s are really different than the 70s, and this is interesting. Even though I'm not going to answer your question, Rob, because I don't want to cast John in the Goonies or something. Although,
right? Well, could he
might have been good as one of the Fratelli brothers in the Goonies, and who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it's also, if you think about it in a macro way, would he have elevated into leading roles as he got a little, or would he stay a character? And the size of those character roles, like I think about Raiders of the Lost Ark, could he have been oh my God, what's his name? Belloc. Belloc, yeah. Could he have been Belloc? Could he have been?
I don't see him that way, but
yeah. Or
but
could he?
He constantly showed up and surprised us and knocked our socks off when
that's what I
least expecting it. So who knows?
When I read the question from Rob, that was actually the first role that I thought of. Or if he didn't want to play that role, he could have played. He could have played the torture guy, with the imprint on his hand.
So.
Yeah. But
I don't think so. I think he's got so much heart and he had so much craft, and I think that the style of what you're talking about, it's hard for me to imagine, and it's because there was a quantum shift in films there in the late 70s, right when he died in 75 to 77, the emergence of Jaws and the big event movie. Yeah. And it's hard for me to imagine him, but more to the point, as I didn't know him and he wasn't my friend, and I don't remember when he died. Like his his filmography is one of perfection. It's one of unimpeachable greatness. He's my favorite actor of all time. And if you start putting him as like the agent in Ishtar, or, you know, as the guy in the Beethoven movies or whatever, and there were, you know, they're good, hefty films in the, you know, maybe in the 80s, but I gotta say, it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same where movie after movie after movie in the 70s, you know, they had their cheap entertainment too, but Horowitz says it. We all came up at this time, and I think we knew it at the time, where there was one glorious opportunity after another, and I think we were aware of it, that it's not going to get any better than this ever. You know, we got to relish each thing. And he was a champion in life of biting it off and chewing it and relishing each moment and each performance. And maybe, I mean, he kept going like everybody else did.
Yeah, but maybe he would have played the accountant in Untouchables. Maybe it could have been Schwarzenegger, Cazale, twins. Maybe,
but I don't yearn for any of those things when I think about it. So it's an interesting question anyway, Rob, because it makes us think. I mean, it makes us try and project him. Pacino says that I'm sure he would have been in stuff, but he says he thinks John would have been really good at running the National Theater.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you always, that's another thing, is you sort of feel like, I mean, his love did continue to be to the end was live theater. He probably would have just carved out an amazing career for himself doing shows in New York. And then doing the occasional film role. If something appealed to him. That brings us to Rob's final question, which is very tongue-in-cheek. It's so if he had lived, do you think he would have continued his policy of only appearing in movies nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards?
No, I don't. And
I like the idea that it was policy. I think that's my favorite part about this question, is somehow he had a policy.
It's a very funny question.
I don't know.
But it goes back to what I just said. He couldn't have.
Yeah.
And therefore his legend would be somewhat tarnished. You know, I still think all these actors are fantastic. Obviously, Meryl Streep, Pacino, Hackman, we just were, you know, spilling our guts over just a few weeks back. You know, these are the best ever, but he's solidly among that group. And no, he couldn't have. He would have done stuff that was not good, and he would have done stuff that was garbage. Yeah. And it is hard to project his style onto like the Back to the Future films or stuff like that. I don't know. I think he maybe could have done it, but it's tough, because the time capsule that we have isn't just great and doesn't just show a very devoted and unique approach to the material. It's just nearly 100% successful.
Yeah.
And that couldn't have continued. It doesn't continue for any of us. He was 42 when he was taken, and that's too young, but it's a rock star sort of passing, and the stuff that he was involved in is immortalized. So I think I don't know how many other superlative adjectives I can come up with, but you get it. Get, after listening to the show to this point, you get how I feel. He wasn't always my favorite actor, but he's the guy that I emulate. I'm always trying to get in touch with the weakness and in touch with the pain, and be willing to not have to be cool when I'm on stage, you know, not to try and drop the veneer that you use to protect yourself that says this is only a performance. And he just did that naturally. He did it because he believed in it, but he also did it naturally, and he brought out the best in everyone around him. And how much nicer thing can you say about a guy? The fact that he was a really nice guy that people loved and missed desperately. You know, the fact that he was a really good friend, and all of that just makes it more of a miracle. So,
yeah. All right. So, did we miss your favorite John Cazale moment? Then you certainly
If
can
we
reach
did,
out
I'll
to
be
us.
impressed. Please let us know.
Yeah, let us know at the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan page on Facebook, at Ask Joel and Ryan on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And you can email us at askjoelandryan@gmail.com. And he lived an amazing life, and he really just what an absolute bright, shining star that obviously was diminished too quickly. And just the 5 films. These 5 films.
He broke our heart, Joel.
Yeah,
he broke our heart.
That's going to do it for us for this week for the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. Go watch yourself a John Cazale film. You won't be disappointed. We promise you that.
Nope.
All right, everybody. Take care. Until next week.
Thank you for listening to The Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. Remember, all views and opinions represented in this podcast are personal and belong solely to the speaker and do not represent those people, institutions, or organizations that the speaker may or may not be associated with, unless explicitly stated. None of these views and opinions were intended to malign or deceive. And now, here's the producers, circa 1982, to play us out.
What a stupid conversation.
Stan, please, I'm trying to work.
Tired of mostly everything.